You see, when people think of deconstruction, the first thing they most likely think about is doubt and the questioning of doctrines. Many people talk about re-examining their faith and beliefs in the midst of deconstruction. In my own story, every belief that I held had been neatly disassembled and laid bare on the floor for examination. So I understand what that's like. Today, we have gone to great lengths to say that deconstruction is first and foremost a crisis of faith. That's everything we just talked about, and that's true. You have to keep that in mind. If you only think of it in terms of re-examining of beliefs, you'll be misunderstanding what deconstruction is and how someone ends up deconstructing in the first place. Deconstruction is suffering. But in saying that, it's important that we understand that deconstruction is more than a re-examining of beliefs, but it's not less than that. Once you are in a crisis, you have to find your bearings and reorient yourself to your new experienced reality. And this is where re-examining your beliefs comes in. It's in the context of the crisis we've discussed previously that someone starts questioning their beliefs. This brings us to the next part of our definition of deconstruction. Deconstruction is a crisis of faith that leads to the questioning of core doctrines. Saying that there are two types of faith communities already feels reductive, but it might be accurate to say that all faith communities land somewhere on a spectrum between two poles. On one side is the pole of fundamentalism. On the other side is a non-anxious environment. Edwin Freeman, author of the book A Failure of Nerve, defines a non-anxious presence as a person who is able to not be drawn into the fray of anxiety swirling around them. A group of non-anxious people led by non-anxious leaders creates non-anxious environments where the community itself and its members aren't drawn into the fray of anxiety. In terms of deconstruction, the crisis of faith is the anxiety someone experiences. A non-anxious environment is a faith community where its members aren't being drawn into unhealthy reactions to someone else's crisis of faith. By contrast, a fundamentalist faith community would see a crisis of faith as a threat and allow the individual's anxiety around their crisis to induce anxiety-filled reactions in trying to tamp down the crisis. The opposite of fundamentalism isn't liberalism. It's a non-anxious environment. A faith community can hold to conservative doctrine, yet conduct themselves with peace in the face of someone's crisis. A liberal or progressive faith community can seem open and inclusive, but actually exude a significant amount of anxiety when someone questions their status quo, which would, ironically, make them fundamentalist. This isn't a matter of specific doctrines that communities do or don't hold. It's the demeanor and the mood of the community. If these two types of faith communities exist on a spectrum, then the intensity to which someone experiences their faith crisis is directly proportional to the level of anxiety in a faith community. In this chart you see, the intensity of someone's faith crisis is on the left-hand side. Their crisis might be small and not cause that much disruption to their life, or it might be so intense it disrupts absolutely everything about their life. The lower it is, the more it will sound like just asking questions. The higher it is, the more it will sound like apostasy. And on the bottom, you'll see the type of faith community that someone is in. They might be in a non-anxious environment or a fundamentalist environment. The more non-anxious someone's faith community is, the less intense their crisis will be. The more fundamentalist it is, the more intense their crisis will be. So how can we tell the difference between a non-anxious faith community and a fundamentalist faith community? There's at least one way, and it is the way in which they regard their doctrine. It's important again to emphasize that we're not talking about the doctrine itself per se, but the way that the doctrine is held. In a non-anxious faith environment, the faith community can clearly and healthily delineate the importance of different doctrines. Gavin Ortlund has done tremendous work in helping lay out a vision of theological triage where certain doctrines are held tighter and in higher regard than others. Ortlund divides doctrine into 4 categories. 1, unimportant. These are beliefs that might be interesting and helpful, but have no substantive effect on your faith. 2, important. These are beliefs that do have a substantive effect on your faith, but are not really worth dividing over. 3, urgent. These beliefs do have a substantive and practical effect on your faith, and they might be worth dividing over or just going to another church. 4, core. These are beliefs that every Christian must believe in order to be a Christian. These would be the beliefs stated in the Apostles' and Nicene Creeds. So here's an example of what that might look like. Again, it could differ slightly from community to community. On the left, I've added 4 phases to each layer of doctrine. 1, discovering. In this phase, you're simply discovering new things about your faith. You might find them helpful or simply interesting. This is where we form many of our preferences that we hold for a reason, but they aren't the most important thing to our faith. 2, discerning. This phase is about discerning important beliefs to hold between the various views that have been held throughout church history. They will affect your faith, and it's important we learn them, but they are not the things that we hold to the tightest. We might say about many of these things, I believe, but I might be wrong. 3, defining. This phase is about defining the tradition we find ourselves in and maybe hope to raise our children in. Are we Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist? I recently spoke with someone who joined the Mennonite Brethren in the last 2 years. It took a lot of work for them to realize that this is the tradition they belonged in because of the beliefs they held. 4, drilling. This phase is about drilling down to the foundation of your faith and deciding if you believe this entire thing called Christianity is true or not. By being able to distinguish between different layers of doctrine and phases of building one's faith, a non-anxious environment can helpfully engage someone at every stage. At no point is someone a threat to the community. In this framework, someone's faith is experienced in 3D with layers and depth and dimension. Someone can question and change their mind on outer layers without ever calling the core into question. Those who are walking with them never need to worry if someone is in danger of losing their faith if they question the age of the earth, for example. But even if someone does question the core doctrines of the faith, a non-anxious environment sees it as another phase of faith building. Instead of being threatened by someone drilling into the core of their faith, they see it as an opportunity for maturity.